This is the Bible Book Club.
And we're in the book of Joshua.
Welcome to the club. Well, Bible Book Clubbians, you have arrived at the final episode of Joshua. Hopefully, you have been with us since the beginning, and if you have now read officially, almost after you listen to today, 6 books of the Bible. Congratulations. You are on your way to reading every single word, which is one of the things that we do here on the Bible Book Club. But before we get to this final episode, let me give you what happened last episode, chapters 22 and 23. The Trans and the Cisjordan tribes had a little tiny misunderstanding about an altar that the Transjordan tribes built just while they were on their way home. It almost ended in war, with Phinehas, the killer priest, leading the charge. But God intervened and peace prevailed. Joshua made his farewell speech to the leaders and people. He exhorted them to remember what God had done for them. He encouraged them to obey God, and he warned them what will happen if they fail to obey God.
Here's our setup for this final episode. We are about to hear the final words from Joshua, and our journey with Joshua began when he led the Israelites to the Promised Land and crossed the Jordan River in chapters 1 through 5. Then in chapters 6 through 12, Joshua conquered the Canaanites. In chapters 13 through 23, he divided up the Promised Land. And now, in this final chapter, he will do what Moses did. He's going to review all God had done for Israel. He's going to renew their covenant relationship with God. And he's going to challenge the Israelites to choose God.
Hey, and that's a good analogy for what we can do today.
Yeah.
How many times do you just spend some time reviewing what God has done for you, renewing your covenant with him, and then asking God, what challenge do you have for me as I forge ahead?
Oh, it's so past, present, and future.
Yeah, but we oftentimes are just going about our lives in a busy way and we don't think about it.
Oh, no, life's a blur for me. You're right.
Yeah.
All right. Joshua reviews all God had done for Israel. In chapter 24, he reviews the journey and sets the stage for his final challenge.
Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God.
After Joshua had blessed them, he probably called for an assembly of the entire nation at Shechem. Not Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle was, which is kind of interesting. Shechem was a big deal with a great ancestral importance. The location that Joshua chose would tie into Joshua's final challenge. This would be more than a meeting with Joshua. They were to present themselves to God, as did Moses so many times throughout the Torah. Joshua begins with a history of where they have been.
Verse 2, Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your people out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea, but they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the wilderness for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them before you, and you took possession of their land. When Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam, son of Beor, to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam, so he blessed you again and again, and I delivered you out of his hand. Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. But I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you. Also, the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow, so I gave you land on which you did not toil and cities you did not build, and you live in them and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant.
Joshua goes way back in their history. He reviews the people and land they came from, Abraham's time, the people and the land they conquered along the way from Egypt until the Promised Land, and the people and the land where they are now inhabiting, the Canaanites, Amorites, etc., Hebuvites, Hittites, whoever you said, Girgashites, all the ites. The same historical story as Moses, just from a different point of view, because Joshua was a military leader with one goal. His entire point of view came from his desire to claim the land, and that was his focus. But now that the land is theirs, he becomes laser focused on something else, keeping the land. And that will rely on a different type of battle, a spiritual battle, not a physical battle, a spiritual battle to be faithful. The Israelites must worship one God. It's Yahweh or the highway. And so Joshua challenges Israel to choose.
Verse 14. Now, fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord.
Joshua commands several things in this one short paragraph. Gotta love him. He's not like Moses. He does not repeat. He gets right to the point. First, fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. What does that mean? Fear sounds to us like a bad thing, but listen to what David, Solomon, and Isaiah have to say about fear. In Psalm 111, David says this.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Well, we all want wisdom, right?
Yep.
And Proverbs 1:7, Solomon said this.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction.
I do not want to be a fool. In the Old Testament, a fool is someone who is morally deficient. I do not want to be that person. No. And in Isaiah 33, Isaiah said this.
He, the Lord, will be the sure foundation for your times, a rich store of salvation and wisdom and knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the key to this treasure.
Well, I definitely want treasure. So to fear the Lord does not mean to be afraid of him. Rather, it means to be so in awe of him that the thought of disappointing him is devastating. In other words, you love God so much, his ways and his desires are your highest goal, and your only concern is that you will disappoint him. For the Israelites, fear of the Lord meant that their desire should be to obey God's laws, worshiping him only and no other gods. Next, Joshua commands them to throw away other gods from 2 different places. I have to admit, I'm kind of surprised that they have other gods with them. We have been through this so many times.
They're supposed to do haram.
Exactly. First, throw away the gods from before and beyond the Euphrates River.
Which means they've carried them with them for
generations,
really long time.
Through Egypt even. Joshua was referring to gods from the Mesopotamia, the land where Abraham is from, where their nation started with his family. This would have been an otherworldly moment for the Israelites. So let me just tell you where they are at this moment when Joshua was talking to them. Remember, Joshua chose Shechem, not like somewhere like Shiloh, where the tabernacle was. So Shechem was the very place that Abraham had first received the promise of the land for the first time. So they are the first generation living in the promised land, and they are standing in Shechem, the first place that Abraham learned why he had been called out. So in Genesis 12, Abraham receives his call to leave Mesopotamia, beyond the Euphrates, and go to the land God will show him. This is what it says.
Genesis 12, verse 6. Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him.
Now remember, they've been hanging their hat on this promise for 400 years of slavery. They knew that Abraham's descendants would one day have this promised land, and they are there, standing in the exact same spot as Abraham did. Huge, huge. Joshua is just so smart. He's creating an experience for them. On top of being the sacred spot where Abraham received the promise, Shechem is where Jacob bought a plot of land after his years in Haran, serving his father-in-law and facing off with Esau. So remember, in Genesis, Jacob ends up serving 7 years and then 7 years again to get his wife Rachel. 7 years for Leah, 7 years for Rachel, and then a few more years because he ends up like working for Laban in a bad way. Like he's frustrated and he finally escapes Laban with all his stuff, but he knows he has to face his brother Esau, who's mad at him for stealing the birthright. It's here that Jacob buys a plot of land after facing off with Esau, because it's here that he's then going to again start living his part of this genealogy. He's been in Never Land, but he's come back to kind of the promised land. So God commanded Jacob and his family in Shechem. So they finished this whole face off with Esau. He's now like overcome that, and he can now return safely to live in the land. And it's in Shechem that he buys this plot of land and buries any foreign gods they had. Again, because God says you need to bury your foreign gods. I'm like surprised they had any. But those little things, those foreign gods are like roaches. They just keep coming back and popping up in Rachel's tent and all other kinds of places. I don't know how.
Well, but don't we also have that one story where somebody had kept a god after
Rachel.
And then, Rachel, I remember that story.
She brought her family's gods.
I'm thinking of one after one of the wars, somebody kept a god and they literally, the land opened up and they all fell into the land.
That was, I think in Numbers. Who was that?
And wouldn't you
swallowed them up.
Wouldn't you think when you're standing here watching all these people fall into the land because they had a god, wouldn't you be like, I might want to go back to my tent and get rid of that little god that I've been carrying since the Euphrates?
I understand I'm not a naysayer of Disney World, but I have friends who just love Disney stuff. It's like trinkets. I don't know if these little gods really meant anything for them spiritually, but they were like trinkets that represented other gods. I don't know. Who knows? But they just keep coming back up. So again, it was Shechem where Jacob kind of recommitted and had his family get rid of more. Joshua commands the Israelites to choose God at Shechem because he wants to make this day unforgettable. This is an ancestral spot. Abraham and Jacob have had big moments there, and they know the history. The Israelites know they are standing on sacred ground. The history that has taken place at Shechem makes it the picture-perfect place to get rid of foreign gods, which is what God wants them to do. Second, Joshua also commands them to get rid of the gods that they might have brought from Egypt. So not only the gods they brought from Abraham's time, but the gods they brought from Egypt, where, they spent 400 years being influenced by Egyptians. So something had to rub off. He wants them to get rid of that too. The final challenge from Joshua is for them to choose who they will serve. So he's so straightforward about it. He says, choose who you're going to serve. If you're going to serve those gods, fine, that's great. Or choose to serve God. But for me and my house, we are serving God. Choose your God and serve him. Joshua makes it so simple. Oh, and by the way, he adds, for me and my family, we're going to serve the Lord. He chose to serve the Lord, and serve he did. And by family, hey, does Joshua have a family? I am still dying to know if he had a wife.
You're still hung up on this.
I'm still crushing on Joshua from way back at the beginning. Clearly he did, because he said for he and his family. Yeah. We just never know. Okay, when I get to heaven, I'm going to be another one of my, top 10 questions.
There's your Easter egg, though. He had a wife. He
had a wife. He must have. Take note. This challenge was not just for the Israelites. It stands today. How do you respond to Joshua's challenge? Who have you chosen, and how well are you serving? And for me, this is super convicting because I just can't compare myself to him. I feel like Joshua has been this sweet spot where for the most part, most things have gone well. It was not like our time with Moses, who really struggled with those Israelites.
He was mad at them all the time. For disobeying.
They were so grumbly and cranky. And then I know what's coming in Judges, and I know what's going to happen, and I know David's battles that are coming. And so Joshua really had a sweet time for the most part. All right, here's how the Israelites respond.
Verse 16, then the people answered, far be it from us to forsake the Lord and to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents up out of Egypt from that land of slavery and performed these great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. Joshua said to the people, you are not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end for you after he has been good to you.
So the people are still riding that tide of victory, where you feel confident, like, yeah, we did it. We are so good. And Joshua brings them down. He lets them know here that they won't be faithful. They will fail. One commentary I read cleverly noted that Joshua attempted to deliver a divine dose of reality to dispel a dangerous delusion. I love that alliteration. This is very discouraging, but like Moses, Joshua must have had some insight into the future to know that they were going to fail, or he was just trusting Moses' insight, because Moses said what Joshua did, but even more severely in Deuteronomy 31.
Deuteronomy 31, verse 27. For I know how rebellious and stiff-necked you are. If you have been rebellious against the Lord while I am still alive and with you, how much more will you rebel after I die? Assemble before me all the elders of your tribes and all your officials so that I can speak these words into their hearing and call the heavens and the earth to testify against them. For I know that after my death, you are sure to become utterly corrupt and to turn from the way I've commanded you. In days to come, disaster will fall on you because you will do evil in the sight of the Lord and arouse his anger by what your hands have made.
Yikes. It seems to me that the Israelites have been much more obedient during Joshua's rule than during Moses's, but perhaps Joshua knows that their commitment is shallow and that their true nature is just below the surface, waiting to erupt. Take note. We all have temptations waiting to surface. What is yours? I hate to think about this. The Israelites are confident and oblivious to their own precarious position, and they respond again confidently with,
back to Joshua in verse 21. But the people said to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. And then Joshua said, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, we are witnesses, they replied. Now then, said Joshua, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God and obey him.
So the people are feeling the experience of being at Shechem, where Abraham and Jacob were, and they are emphatic. They will serve the Lord. And Joshua, like a parent who doesn't really believe them, asks them one more time. It's kind of a deja vu moment because Moses did the exact same thing. Before he died, he couldn't resist asking again. Like, let me just see if I ask him one more time, will it stick? For these two men, Moses and Joshua, who worked so hard to get the Israelites where they were in the promised land, the threat that they could lose it all, it was painful. It's like us as parents. If you have kids, you want, let me just ask them one more time because, oh my gosh, if they don't obey, this could be really, really bad. So you keep asking. That's how we end up nagging. Well, next, Joshua renews their covenant relationship.
Verse 25. On that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people, and there at Shechem he reaffirmed for them decrees and laws. And Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. Then Joshua dismissed the people, each to their own inheritance.
I think they must have been a little sad when they left because they probably thought this is the last time I'll see Joshua. They kind of knew this was a big deal end, but the people reaffirmed their commitment to God vehemently, and Joshua marked the day with a memorial, a visible reminder, and he also recorded it in the book of law. That was it. They were sent on their way. No new leader. Now, one has to wonder if this sudden leadership vacuum rattled the Israelites a little bit. Joshua is saying goodbye. No surprise there. He's 110, and they just did the ceremony. But when Moses said goodbye, there had been a clear transfer of leadership to Joshua. Joshua has now been leading them for over 2 decades. Without a designated leader, the Israelites must directly follow God all by themselves. No one to remind them, chastise them, warn them, fix it when they mess up, talk to God, etc. They would have the priests, but on top of that, they're going to be geographically dispersed. So it's not like they're going to have this central leadership. Remember, they always knew, okay, we can gather and talk to Joshua. How will they respond to the imminent loss of leadership? Well, we will find out in the next book in the Bible, in season 7, when God raises up help for them from the judges, but it's not quite the pretty picture we're getting in Joshua. All right, next, let's talk about who was buried in the Promised Land. The book of Joshua closes with not one, but 3 important burials: Joshua, Joseph, and Eleazar.
Verse 29. After these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnah Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel.
Okay, in the first sentence that Heather read, it said, after these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died. Joshua is given a very honorable title here as the servant of the Lord. Only he and Moses, only these 2 leaders ever received this title of servant of the Lord. So it's a huge honor. The last verse that Heather read was kind of like Joseph's epitaph. It stated that his influence was so great that Israel served the Lord in his generation and in the next generation, almost like it had this, continuing
hangover effect.
Yeah, exactly. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if that was your epitaph? So here lies Heather. The Rubio served the Lord throughout her lifetime and throughout the lifetime of the children who outlived her. Wouldn't you love that?
Yes,
would you love that?
And that is a promise that God makes to us, because he says if you raise up a child in the way they should go, then they will not depart from it when they are old.
Exactly. All these things weave together. So while we all would like to be influencers in today's vernacular, most of us only have real influence over a few, and our families would be at the top of the list. But every family has generations that follow, and that can lead to years of people who served the Lord if you use your influence wisely in this generation.
Hallelujah. All right, continuing on in verse 32. And Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. And Eleazar, son of Aaron, died, and he was buried at Gibeah, which had been allotted to his son Phinehas in the hill country of Ephraim.
So first, super cool, Joseph is buried in the plot of land that his father Jacob had purchased in the Promised Land. Before, it was actually the land that they inherited. So we're just doing circles here. Before Joshua died, he made sure another promise was completed, because you see, in Egypt, over 400 years prior to this day, in Genesis 50, Joseph made the Israelites swear to him.
Genesis 50, verse 25. And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place.
Joseph had been sold into slavery in Egypt and then rose to, be Pharaoh's aid. but he didn't want to be buried there. And before he died, he made them promise, take my bones out, which is so bizarre, but
they did it.
They did it.
They also fulfilled that promise
Yeah.
here. So lots and lots of
Yes,
promises.
Joshua leaves no task unfinished. It's like he has this list. He's so zealous. He buries the almost 400-year-old bones of Joseph, which I guess Moses had made sure, or the Israelites had made sure they took it out of Egypt when they left. Okay, moving on to Eleazar. He also is buried in the Promised Land. Now, with Eleazar and Joshua's death, the successors to Moses and Aaron, Eleazar and Joshua, have also both died. So you had these teams. You had Moses and Aaron, then you had Joshua and Eleazar. Now, the priesthood will get a new leader. There won't be a national leader to replace Joshua, but Phinehas, the killer priest, will replace his father as the high priest in Judges season 7. Joshua, too, is buried in the Promised Land. It is believed that his grave has been found, actually, and in July 2022, an archaeological dig was started at the site in Kirbet Tibnah. It is also believed that Caleb is buried with him, which I think is super sweet because these two spent their whole lives serving together while all their other friends died in the wilderness. The contrast between Moses' unknown grave outside the land and Joshua's known gravesite in the land is just interesting to me. Only God knows why one is known and one isn't. Joshua served the Lord for 7 decades. He died at 110 years of age. Now in Joshua 14:7, we learned that Joshua was 40 years old when Moses sent him out with the 11 spies. That's kind of the first known task we have for him. This means that Joshua served Israel for over 70 years of his life. That is more than Moses, who served for 40 years of his life. Now, Joshua was only the main leader for 20 years, while Moses was the main leader for 40 years. But still, 70 years Joshua was working. Now, another number thing, you guys know I love numbers. I love numbers. 110 is that same age that Joseph lived to, but it's 10 years younger than Moses. So you have to wonder if is there a hierarchy up there of something? I don't know.
I don't know that I want to live to 110.
Joshua served more, but, Moses lived longer. I don't know. The end of Joshua marks the end of a story that actually began in Genesis, the story of waiting for the Promised Land. Joshua, Eleazar, Moses, Aaron, and Joseph are the heroes that were instrumental in getting the Israelites to their destination. It wasn't easy, but they persevered, each one of them in their own way. They are all examples. So what can we learn from Joshua's life as we close out? Joshua had many similarities to Moses and is often compared to Moses or even called the new Moses. Like Moses, Joshua called the people to obey the laws given at Mount Sinai. Like Moses, Joshua sent spies into the land, although Joshua had more success. Joshua also leads the people, parting the Jordan as Moses parted the Red Sea. Both Moses and Joshua received a barefoot revelation, and here's what I mean by this. Moses at the burning bush was told to take off his sandals, and Joshua was commanded to take off his sandals by commander of God's army in Joshua 5. Moses defeated the Egyptians and Joshua the Canaanites. So lots of parallels there. Now, Joshua is also compared to Jesus. He is looked upon as a type of savior like Jesus. And this is how they are similar. They have the same name. Jesus in Hebrew is Joshua, which means Yahweh saves. Both Jesus and Joshua were leaders intent on executing God's commands. Both were conquerors. Joshua defeated the Canaanites, and Jesus defeated the enemy at the cross. As a result, both saved people or delivered them from their enemies. Joshua from the Canaanites and Jesus from Satan. They both led people to a promised inheritance. Joshua to the promised land and Jesus to the promised kingdom. and both were obedient servants, faithfully devoted to the Lord's will. Now, there are a few ways their mission differed. Joshua fought with physical weapons and won through the blood of others. Jesus fought with spiritual weapons and won through his own blood, the ultimate sacrifice. Joshua had good reason to believe that his work would be undone because of Israel's sin. Jesus knew that his work would be sealed for eternity and never undone. Joshua led people into a promise that was a temporary residence. The promised land, they would die, they would lose it. It wasn't theirs forever. Jesus leads people to an eternal home in the promised kingdom with him. Lots of comparisons between Joshua and Jesus, but also Joshua led people into a promise that was fulfilled, but it wasn't eternal. Jesus fulfilled those promises for eternity, and we reap those benefits even today. Before we close this book, remember where we started. This is a good practice for us, just like Moses and Joshua, always reminding people to remember. Remember where we started at the beginning of season 6. We discussed the theme verse. It was Joshua 1:9. The Lord said to Joshua,
"Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go."
And this is the common theme verse because it's repeated like 5 times to Joshua. Now, for me, after completing the book, I think what I will try to remember from this book is kind of a bookend theme verse. And here's what I mean by this. There's a really good verse at the beginning and there's a really good verse at the end. I want to combine them. I want to combine part of verse 9 in the first chapter with part of verse 15 in the last chapter. It would read like this.
"Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So then, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord."
This to me represents both sides. What God will do for us, so then we need to choose him and serve him. He tells us to be strong and do not be discouraged because he will be with us wherever we go. So then we need to choose him every day and serve him. And we need to take a stand against the enemy and say, this household will serve the Lord.
Well, if you love a good plot twist, and what book club member doesn't, then keep on listening to season 7, because coming up in the book of Judges, there is a plot twist coming.
Where in this book, the Canaanites are going to become a tempting influence on Israel, leading them down a commandment-breaking path. On the way, we're going to meet a crowd of characters. We're not going to focus on one like with Joshua. That include Othniel, Deborah, Gideon, Samson, Delilah, Micah, and many more. The promised land victory celebrated in the book of Joshua will be followed by years of fickle faithlessness as we march through the book of Judges.
What's a club without friends? If you're enjoying the Bible Book Club, why don't you share it? And then you can say, "Welcome to the club." New episodes drop every Monday, and get all episodes now on Amazon Music. As always, head over to susanme.com/Bible Book Club for show notes from today's episode. Bible Book Club is hosted by Susan Merrill and Heather Rubio, edited by Buck Buchanan, produced by Hayley Mawat.